In 2024, around 10,400 millionaires left the UK.
The departure of Britain's super rich.
A record number of millionaires have left Britain since Keir Starmer came to power.
The country is not just stagnating, it's fossilising.
That's 6,000 more than the previous year.
Why does this mean anything to me?
The reason that this affects you is that the top 1% of earners in the UK pay 29% of the income tax that the Treasury gets. That's just shy of a third. And to put this into perspective, the top 1% of earners take home £130,000 or more every year. If you earn the average UK salary of £35,000, you'd need 10 people to cover one person earning £130,000. From the 10,400 millionaires that have left, it's predicted £880 million in income tax revenue was lost just last year, which is the equivalent of 196,563 people earning the average UK salary of £35,000 to cover that loss in tax revenue. And with that number expected to rise to 20% of the UK's millionaires by 2028, it would require 9,440,781 people earning the average UK salary just to cover that loss. And currently, there's 33 million working adults in this country. And whilst the amount of tax millionaires pays obviously varies, the bottom line is that even if half of what's predicted to leave actually leave, then the government has a huge hole to fill. And guess who holds the bag here?
It's you, my friend.
The result will mean further increases in tax, food bills and energy payments, as well as the general cost of living, as it will spark a rise in inflation, unemployment and therefore economic instability. The UK is bang in trouble. So I want to unpack how we've got here and how we could potentially turn this around. Now let's start with where we are today, February 2025. The first thing I discovered was that the UK isn't the only country experiencing millionaire migration. In fact, around 128,000 millionaires moved to different countries worldwide in 2024, which is double the number from 10 years ago. It seems like several countries like Canada and Singapore are offering low taxes or virtually no tax at all like the UAE. The catch though is that while there's a global trend happening, the stats make it clear things are not great for Britain right now. In 2024, more millionaires left the UK than anywhere else except China. China lists a whopping 15,200 people, and that sounds like loads more, but it really isn't. It is of course as a number, but when you break it down by how many millionaires there are in China, they only lost 0.01% more of them than the UK. So what has been driving this trend? Well, the press has been quick to blame the new Labour government's tax rises and Rachel Reeves' attitude to British business as a whole, but that's not where it started. Many millionaires left before Labour came into power, and some argue that the previous government was just as responsible. By the time the Conservatives left office, taxes in the UK were already among the highest in the world. So moving back on our calendar to 2023, the Tories decided to raise the upper tax limit of corporation tax. That's the amount you pay if your company's profits are over £250,000. They raised that from 19 to 25%. Now, a lot of millionaires make their money through corporations and dividends, chunks of profit paid out a few times a year, which by the way are also taxed. And the Conservatives put that up a little bit as well. Essentially, a 6% increase was the icing on the cake, but when looking back, it's what actually formed the main layer of this millionaire Victoria sponge that was the big problem. Now, the start of this was the big one, and that takes us back to 2017. And was it Brexit success or bust? Well, from 2017 to 2023, 16,500 millionaires left the UK, many citing Brexit as a major reason. Now, Brexit had a huge impact on the wealthy in Britain. It made trade tougher with our biggest trading partners and increased the amount of red tape and cost of that red tape as well. This also had a huge impact on companies within the London Stock Exchange, which actually dropped from one of the largest in the world to ranking 9th, making Britain harder to grow businesses and even list those businesses on the stock exchange. To get that capital in to actually grow that business means we hire less people that are based here. Now, this directly affects you, even though it's a lot harder to see. Now, to add another layer here to our cake, we head to 2020 on our calendar, and the impact the pandemic had was absolutely monumental. The pandemic didn't just bring about a health crisis, it helped reshape wealth distribution in the UK in ways that are still being felt today. Now, the direct effect of the pandemic led to an increase in savings and a reduction in debts, which initially contributed to a net £134 billion increase in total wealth across the UK. However, the bigger factor was asset price inflation, which added an astonishing £756 billion to wealth during the crisis. Now, whilst this may sound like a positive economic outcome, the reality is wealth accumulation was highly uneven. Those already holding assets like property, stocks and business shares saw the largest gains, whereas those without investments, particularly lower income households, saw little to no benefit. Millionaires in particular experienced massive increases in wealth. Those in the top 10% of wealth holders saw a rise of £44,000 per person, while middle wealth families gained an average of just £7,800. But why does this matter for millionaire migration? Well, the UK government, seeing the sharp rise in wealth among the top earners, introduced new tax policies to capture more revenue from those gains. But instead of contributing more, many of these high net worth individuals saw the writing on the wall and chose to leave before they were forced to pay even more. Now, with their wealth heavily tied up in assets that had already appreciated, millionaires found it increasingly attractive to cash out and relocate to low tax countries like the UAE, Singapore or Switzerland. And to put another layer of Victoria sponge on our cake, the UK isn't exactly Italy, Portugal or Dubai when it comes to weather. It's grey and rainy 7 months of the year, and even our summers are pretty temperamental. But I think one part that gets overlooked too is the fact that the UK, in comparison to Dubai in say safety terms, is, well, incomparable. You can't wear a nice watch walking around London, but you very much can in Dubai, as they pride themselves on safety. But heading back to 2023 on our calendar, this is where the icing starts getting layered on real thick. And it wasn't until after it was obvious Labour were going to win by a landslide in late 2023 that the floodgates of millionaires leaving really opened. The argument here is that the new Labour government was planning to target the wealthy once they were in power, and their manifesto backed that up. It mentioned closing tax loopholes for the rich and taxing private schools. They did not promise, however, to increase taxes on working families, but because they found it hard to say what exactly a working family was, it meant they hadn't ruled out increases on things like inheritance and capital gains tax. That spooked a lot of millionaires even before Labour had a chance to present a budget. When Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivered that budget last October, she supercharged those fears. She did stick to her promise of not increasing taxes directly on working families, but she also kept the Tory corporation tax hikes. Then she did increase the higher rate of capital gains tax, which she assumed is something that most working people don't pay, some do, from 20% to 24%. To be fair, this was actually a bit of a relief because some people thought it was going to shoot up to a whopping 40%. I was in WhatsApp groups with this kind of chatter happening all the time, but it's still a big increase. And then she broke out the big guns, her changes to non-dom status. In the UK, non-dom status is for people who live here but have their permanent home, their domicile, outside of the country for tax purposes. So if you're a non-dom, you don't pay tax on your international income, only on anything that you make or bring into the UK. Now, non-dom status is particularly unpopular with the general public. The common view is that they're tax dodgers living here to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. And if there's one thing that Brits hate, it's tax dodgers. Just ask Jimmy Carr.
Sorry.
There's also an economic argument against non-doms. A Warwick University study claimed that abolishing non-dom status completely could raise £3.2 billion every single year for the Treasury. That's very tempting to a government that says it wants to actually rebuild the NHS, for example. But it's not just the Labour government that liked the idea of getting rid of non-doms. The Conservatives knew about the report too. Former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt even had plans to gradually phase out non-dom status over the next few years. So Chancellor Rachel Reeves, as part of her first budget, decided that this was all too slow and announced that she would be abolishing non-dom status completely from April 2025. From then on, if you live in the UK, you'll be taxed on all your income, and that wasn't all. Reeves really doubled down on this and announced that all wealth would be taken into account, not just their income, but anything they owned, holdings, shares, property, or whatever else was in their portfolios. So could that be the reason for the exodus? Well, it certainly looks that way if you read the press, but here is the problem. The best case scenario is that all the millionaires left were non-doms, and an Oxford economics report suggests that in the best case, changing non-dom status could actually bring in £1 1.3 billion in tax revenue each year by 2025 to 2026, dropping to 1.1 billion by 2030. But the worst case scenario, which they think is pretty likely, is that a third of all non-doms would leave. If that happens, the Treasury would lose £900 million a year. And there's another problem. The people leaving probably aren't all non-doms. Non-doms make up just 12% of millionaires, and despite Oxford Economics' research, there isn't much solid data on how many of the 10,400 millionaires who left last year have also got that non-dom status, given that they only spoken to 72 non-doms and 50 tax advisors. So we don't know if just 12% of the people leaving are non-doms, or if it's everyone, but I'd say it's probably not just non-doms. The rest of the people who are leaving are other members of the 1%. The top 1% of earners in the UK pay a large amount of tax, as we know, and in 2023 to 2024 that was around about £259 billion a year. It's predicted that up to 500,000 millionaires might have left for sun, sea and lower taxes by 2028, with even more to follow, and that would be absolutely catastrophic for the UK. When that hole in tax starts to appear, the government will have to increase taxes more. They're probably not going to raise income taxes because that would be politically impossible, so they'd have to increase taxes on businesses. Millionaires tend to be entrepreneurs and business owners, so they'll be the ones that are hit hardest by those taxes, and that could make even more millionaires leave. So the government will then have to raise business taxes again, or look at other tax raises elsewhere, making the exodus even worse until the UK faces the very real threat of that £1 billion loss growing into a near £259 billion black hole. But how does this actually make us all poorer? Well, to cover the losses from tax, any millionaire business owner who does stay within the UK will either have to fire some staff or they'll have to raise prices, probably both. These are businesses that any increases in tax hit their profits, and companies have a duty to its board of directors and of course its shareholders to remain profitable and ideally in growth. So what that actually means is lowering staff costs and raising prices. Guess who holds the bag here, guys? It's the working people of this country the most. When the price hikes happen, it means higher inflation across the country and higher unemployment, which means we're all going to be worse off. We need our millionaires to stay put. So heading back to today, February 2025, what can we do about it? Well, for starters, better taxes could help. The government could start by dropping the top rate of income tax, but that's unlikely given Labour's promise. I know a politician's promise and all of that, but they do seem determined to keep that one, probably because it would be massively unpopular. But they could also ease up on the non-dom rules, and it seems Rachel Reeves is at least on board with that, if only a little. She recently added an amendment to the bill that lets non-doms bring in more money without paying as much tax. Not everybody's thrilled about it, saying it's too little, too late, but hey, it is a start in that direction. And they could also drop corporation tax. In 2013, George Osborne cut corporation tax from 23% to 20%. And now, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, businesses use some of that extra profit to reinvest into themselves, leading to more growth and therefore more jobs. And those new workers then paid more taxes and bought more stuff. And since most products have VAT added, that meant more cash for the Treasury. Now, something else that they could look at doing is further lowering the amount of tax that younger and smaller businesses have to pay, the ones that have the potential to be the new unicorns of tomorrow. We need to make it more attractive for businesses to list on the London Stock Exchange and look at promoting entrepreneurship and smaller businesses, which are the backbone of this economy. It would really drive enormous growth, and it seems so simple, but somehow so far away from any of the government's thinking of the past decade. Now, yes, I know millionaires aren't popular. Some people say they hoard most of the country's wealth and rip off hard-working people with low wages, so good riddance to them. Well, in truth is, we need to keep our millionaires happy and ideally growing our businesses and growing their businesses as well, because it just trickles down and essentially makes our country a lot wealthier. Now, guys, if you actually want to go a little bit deeper on what's happening to the UK economy right now, then my conversation over on my podcast, the Money Gains Podcast with Andrew Craig, who's an economist and best-selling personal finance author, is an absolute banger. I'm going to leave a link to that in the show notes below. But for now, guys, I will catch you on the next one.